Hi there, my name is Yasmin and I'm a tutor here at Tutor Impact. And today we are going to be looking at the play Romeo and Juliet. Now, Romeo and Juliet is a play written by William Shakespeare. If you don't know who that is, then Louise, another one of our tutors here at Tutor Impact, has made a dedicated video just about William Shakespeare, so you can learn more about him. But he is a famous playwright and he's written a lot of plays. It was a long time ago now, but they're still being performed today, and still modern adaptations of those plays are still being made on film and also in the theatre. As will become clear as we go through the plot of this play itself, this play, Romeo and Juliet, is in fact a Shakespearean tragedy. It's a tragic love story where the two main characters, Romeo and Juliet, are supposed to be sworn enemies, but in fact they fall in love. So it's one of Shakespeare's most famous tragedies. As you'll see, it doesn't end in the best positive way, but it's a really interesting story, and we're going to go through the plot and learn about the characters in today's lesson. So the story actually follows two families, and these two families are called the Montague family and the Capulets. So the Montagues and the Capulets. And ultimately, it is the feuding between these two families that leads to the tragedy at the end of the story. So if you just remember these two names for now, we have the Montague family and the Capulet family. And this is going to be helpful as we look at the characters in the plot. So we have all of these characters who feature at some point in the story. So with the two main characters in this story are Romeo and Juliet, which you might have guessed from the name of this play. So we have Romeo and we have Juliet. Now, Romeo is from, if you remember, we spoke about those two families. Romeo is from the Montague family. So he is Romeo Montague, and Juliet is from the Capulet family. So Juliet's from the Capulets and Romeo is from the Montagues. So already you're probably thinking, oh, that's going to cause some issues because I have already told you that those two families don't get on. But we're going to go into more about that later on. But just remember for now that Romeo is part of the Montagues and Juliet is part of the Capulets. We then have Romeo's parents, who are Lady Montague and Lord Montague, and we have Juliet's parents, who are Lord Capulet and Lady Capulet. Now, we also have some other characters in this story. So we have Tybalt, who is another member of the Capulet family. And there's also Paris, who is actually not a Capulet, but he's like a sort of family friend of the Capulets. We have the prince, who is the Prince of Verona, who is part of the story in a sort of more distant sense, but you'll see the role he plays, but he's not related to the families. We have Benvolio and Mercutio, both of whom are friends with Romeo, and they are on the Montague side of the divide. And then we also have Friar Lawrence, who is a friar, like a priest in the story. And we also have Juliet's nurse, who plays a role in the story. So as we said before, we've got the Montagues on one side, on this left-hand side here, and we have the Capulets on the other side. Now you know those sorts of basic characters, we're now going to go step by step through the main points in the story. Obviously, this is a very sort of brief outline of the actual plot. So if you are interested in the story, I'd really recommend you sort of reading online or even trying to go and see it performed live, because it's a really, really interesting story. But I'm just going to give you a sort of rough outline of what happens, sort of a synopsis as such. So the play opens with the two families fighting. So you'll remember, as I said, there are two families in the story, and they are the Montagues and the Capulets. So the story actually opens with these two wealthy families having another fight in the city of Verona. You see in the story that this sort of fighting has happened before, and it's sort of another fight in a series of fights that has taken place. However, this fight is sort of the final straw for the prince, and the townspeople cannot cope anymore with the constant fighting that is going on. As a result of this, the prince, who is the Prince of Verona, where the play is set, he declares that the next person to break the peace and have another fight will be killed. So there's been a lot of fighting up to this point between the Montagues and Capulets. The prince has had enough, and he says if anyone has another fight in Verona, then there will be consequences and that person will be killed. So this sets up the story for what will happen later on. But just remember, they're not allowed to have any more fights, and this has sort of been declared by the prince. Now, the story then moves on to the two main characters who I outlined at the start. So Romeo Montague and Juliet. So what happens next is Romeo and his friends, they actually gate crash a Capulet party. So the Montagues, Romeo and his Montague friends, they gate crash a Capulet party. And this is where Romeo meets Juliet for the first time. And they both fall in love with each other instantly. So we have, again, Romeo from the Montague family and Juliet from the Capulets, and they immediately fall in love. And then they are shocked to later learn that they are both sworn enemies due to their feuding families. So they don't know at the start that they're each from different families. Obviously, Juliet would not be expecting Romeo, who is a Montague, to be at the Capulet party. But they later find out that they are from these two opposing families, and they're shocked by this because they're obviously sworn enemies. However, despite this, after speaking with each other and expressing their love, they actually secretly get married in secret by Friar Lawrence. So the priest I spoke to you about at the start, he secretly marries Romeo and Juliet in secret, and nobody knows about it. So the two are secretly married quite early on in the play. What happens next is, as you could probably guess from the sort of rule put in at the start and the foreboding at the start, there is then another fight. And the way this comes about is Romeo goes out to sort of celebrate the fact that him and Juliet have married, and he's gone out and celebrated this with his friends Mercutio and Benvolio, who we mentioned at the start. So the three Montague people from the Montague family, they're going out and they're celebrating the fact that Romeo has got married. In the midst of all this, Tybalt, who is actually Juliet's cousin, so Tybalt from the Capulet side, he bumps into these three Montagues as they are celebrating. So if you remember, so we have the three Montagues, we have Romeo, Mercutio and Benvolio, and we have Tybalt from the Capulet family, and they cross paths as the three Montagues are celebrating. And what happens is that it basically ends up into a fight, and Tybalt, who is Juliet's cousin from the Capulet side, he actually kills Mercutio. So Tybalt from the Capulet family kills Mercutio, who is Romeo's best friend. Obviously, as a result of this, Romeo is very angry because Tybalt has killed Romeo's best friend. And Romeo avenges his friend's death by then going on to kill Tybalt. So we have two deaths here. We have Mercutio from the Montagues, and then we have Tybalt from the Capulets, and Romeo is left alive at the end of this. So Tybalt kills Mercutio, and then Romeo kills Tybalt, and then Romeo is obviously left alive. So just to go back to the character list from the start, as you can see, a member of each family has been killed here. So we've lost Mercutio from the Montagues, and we've lost Tybalt, who is Juliet's cousin from the Capulets. And Romeo is left alive, and so is Benvolio, who also was there at the time, but who did not. But it was Romeo who killed Tybalt. The result of this, obviously, if you think back to the first scene I spoke about, where the prince has declared that anyone else who causes a fight will be killed, this is obviously going to play a role in what happens next. So if we move on to the next slide, as you could probably guess, there are consequences for Romeo. And the consequences is that the prince decides to banish Romeo because he killed Tybalt. Obviously, at the start of the play, he says that anyone else who causes any fighting will be killed. So in fairness, perhaps banishment isn't as bad as perhaps it could have been, but Romeo is banished from Verona, where the play is set, which obviously is where his family lives, which is where Juliet lives. So it's obviously a very, very sort of distressing time for Romeo. And both him and Juliet are heartbroken at the fact that they are being separated by this exile. So Romeo is banished, he leaves Verona. Meanwhile, Juliet stays in Verona. And while Romeo is in exile, Lord Capulet, who is Juliet's father, decides that she must marry Paris. Now, you remember I mentioned Paris briefly at the start, but he is just who Juliet is sort of betrothed to at this stage in the story. Because obviously Juliet is married, she refuses because she's still in love with Romeo. She tells her father she doesn't want to go ahead with this, and she runs to go and see Friar Lawrence. So if you remember correctly, Friar Lawrence was the person who married Juliet and Romeo in secret early on in the story. So they go to Friar Lawrence, and she wants him to help her come up with a plan so that she can be with Romeo again. And what that plan is that Juliet will fake her death. So the plan is that Friar Lawrence and Juliet come up with is that Juliet is going to take some sleeping potion and fake her death. So Juliet goes ahead with this plan. She takes a sleeping potion and she lies in a tomb faking her death, waiting for Romeo to come so they can run away together. So she takes the sleeping potion and she lies down, and it obviously looks like she's died. The play is set in a time where there isn't modern medicine, so little was known sort of about that side of things. So from the perspective of her family, she was dead. So they put her in a tomb and she waits there for Romeo. However, Romeo doesn't actually receive the message about this plan. A message was sent to him, but he doesn't, for whatever reason, receive this message. So he thinks that Juliet has actually died when she took this potion. So he goes to Verona, back to Verona, in order to see Juliet in her tomb to pay his respects as she is dead. So Romeo returns to Verona to see Juliet where she is still asleep, having taken the sleeping potion. So what happens next is the point of tragedy in the play, and it's probably one of the most famous scenes in the entire play and probably out of all of Shakespeare's plays. So Romeo comes to the tomb where Juliet is asleep, and he sees her and she is still asleep at the time. So he assumes, as did everyone else, that she is in fact dead. So as a result of this, Romeo is heartbroken and he drinks a poison, so that he can be with Juliet in death. So Romeo takes his own life and he dies. And then later on, when Juliet does wake up, she finds that Romeo has died, and she is obviously very upset as well. As a result of this, she then kills herself as well with his dagger. So Romeo takes the poison, Juliet wakes up, sees that Romeo is dead, and she kills herself with Romeo's dagger. And that is obviously the point of tragedy in the play. So we lose Romeo and we lose Juliet, in addition to the characters we have already lost in the play. The only sort of silver lining that comes out of these two deaths are that the Montagues and the Capulets, when they find the two have died, both Romeo and Juliet, they agree to end their feuding and they vow never to argue again. So although the play does lose a lot of characters, there is sort of some harmonization at the end, albeit not a great one in comparison to what has happened in the story. So just a quick recap of the play. I will show you this illustration. So as you can see, we spoke about the Montagues and the Capulets fighting at the beginning. This is where the prince says that there should be no more fighting going on in Verona. We then move to when Romeo falls in love with Juliet, and they then get married, which then leads to Romeo going out and celebrating this marriage, which is where Romeo kills Tybalt in revenge because Tybalt has killed his friend Mercutio. As a result of killing Tybalt, Romeo is then banished from Verona, so he is exiled. and Juliet is told to marry Paris. As a result of Romeo being exiled, Juliet fakes her own death to try and be able to see him and be reunited again. However, when Romeo comes back, he hasn't seen the message that's been sent to him about the plan. So he takes the poison, and then Juliet in turn then kills herself with the knife because she has realized that Romeo is dead. And at the end of the story, the Montagues and the Capulets end their feud. And that is the whole plot of the story. As I said at the beginning, this does sort of neglect to go into the detail of the story, but this is just a brief synopsis of the main parts of the story. I really hope this has been interesting. And as I said, I'd really recommend reading the story, the plot in full online, or if you can, seeing the play live. It's really interesting to watch. And it's, as I said, one of Shakespeare's most well-known pieces. But thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.